The Oscar slap dismantled the architecture of Hollywood's most disciplined brand in a single second. This visceral eruption of violence transformed a global symbol of joy into a vessel of bottled rage before 1 billion witnesses. What appeared to be a spontaneous defense of family was actually the structural failure of a 30-year psychological fortress. This rupture raises a series of disturbing questions about the cost of maintaining a public facade. Was the slap an anomaly, or was it the inevitable result of a system built on suppressed trauma? How does a man who engineered the most successful movie career in history lose control of his own narrative at the moment of his greatest triumph? Can a persona crafted for global hegemony survive the intrusion of the authentic self?
The genesis of the phenomenon known as Will Smith does not begin on a film set in Burbank, but in the sweltering, humid air of 1980s West Philadelphia, specifically within the Winfield neighborhood. To understand the root cause of the relentless drive that fueled his ascent, one must analyze the 0 point, a gaping 12-foot hole in the front of a small refrigeration shop. In the memoir Will by Will Smith and Mark Manson, this period is described as a year-long psychological siege where a 9-year-old was forced to rebuild a crumbling brick wall by hand. This was not a lesson in carpentry. It was a socialization into the cult of discipline directed by Willard Carroll Smith Sr., a man the family called Daddy-O. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and the rhythmic scraping of shovels against concrete, as Will and his brother mixed 2 parts cement, 1 part sand, and 1 part lime. Daddy-O, an alcoholic who functioned with military precision, used this wall to instill a fundamental belief. The wall is an impossible illusion, but the brick is a manageable reality.
This upbringing was defined by a terrifying paradox of protection and peril. Daddy-O was a man of the poetry of profanity who never missed a game or a recital. Yet he was capable of knocking Will's mother unconscious in a single brutal moment of violence. Witnessing this act crystallized Will's identity as a coward, a label he would spend the next 3 decades trying to outrun through the creation of a hero persona. The neighborhood of Winfield provided the stage for this burgeoning talent, a diverse, middle-class enclave of stone row homes, where Will learned to use humor as a defense mechanism against conflict. The community spirit of West Philly fostered his charisma, but the root cause of his success remained that foundational trauma. As explained in the memoir, the secret to his success was as boring as it was unsurprising. You show up and you lay another brick. This military-style work ethic was the mortar used to fill the holes in his own self-esteem, creating a man who believed that if he could just perform perfectly enough, he could prevent the destruction of his world.
The soundscape of this era, the heavy, wet thud of mortar meeting brick, and the constant abrasive sound of the shovel became the metronome of his life. This was the moment everything was set in motion, the 0 point, where the entertainer was born out of a desperate need to please a violent patriarch. This architectural approach to the self would soon move from the sidewalks of Philadelphia to the global stage, where the bricks would become blockbusters.
The moment everything changed was not a creative epiphany, but a cold, data-driven realization that Hollywood was a system of untapped global potential. By the mid-1990s, the Fresh Prince had conquered television, but he aimed for a more profound hegemony. He wanted to be the biggest movie star in the world. To achieve this, Smith and his producing partner, James Lasseter, ran the numbers on international box office performance. They identified a systemic anomaly. While most A-list actors loathed the grueling press tours of foreign territories, these regions represented the largest growth opportunity for a personal brand. Smith flipped the script, deciding to use the movie studio's $150 million promotional budgets not to sell a film, but to sell himself as a global commodity. He realized that if he personally visited a country like Spain, learned a few local phrases, and engaged in a day of fan events, he could increase a film's local earnings from $10 million to $25 million.
This strategic pivot transformed the nature of movie stardom into a form of hegemonic architecture. Smith wasn't just acting, he was engineering hits through a military-grade commitment to showing up. He understood that by multiplying this localized engagement across 30 global territories, he could take a $250 million global potential and push it north of $500 million. This was the genius plan hidden in plain sight. The studios were unknowingly bankrolling the construction of the Will Smith brand, which would eventually allow him to demand higher pay because his presence was proven to double or triple the bottom line.
This period marked the solidification of Smith as a corporate entity. The statistical data from Box Office Mojo and the Q scores from this era indicate that Smith was consistently ranked in the top 10 most positively rated actors, alongside Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington. His films were not just entertainment, they were instruments of Americanization that propagated U.S. culture overseas while simultaneously enriching the Smith empire. However, the paradox of this success was that as the brand grew more expansive, the human behind it was forced to become more rigid. The pressure to maintain this front stage perfection was building toward a structural failure that no amount of global promotion could fix.
This is the core of the investigation, the realization that Will Smith was never a person in the public eye, but a performer managing a carefully constructed definition of the situation. As explained by Irving Goffman in his seminal book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, this phenomenon is known as dramaturgy, a theory which posits that social interaction is a theatrical performance, where individuals manage impressions to obtain desirable responses. Goffman's model divides existence into the front stage, the public setting where one adheres to social norms, and the backstage, the private area where the actor can relax and shake off the role. For 30 years, Will Smith maintained the most successful front stage in the history of the celebrity persona pandemic. The anchor of his credibility was his clean and friendly image, a signification management strategy that he utilized to foster specific beliefs about his character. He was the entertainer who corrected and directed his performance to ensure conformity with ideological positions that the public found non-threatening. However, Goffman warns that when an individual's backstage behavior, the messy, traumatized reality, leaks into the front stage, it causes a strained performance and a failed attempt to influence the frame. The public interaction on Red Table Talk and the eventual Oscar slap were precisely these types of leaks. They were breaching experiments where the expectations of the audience were subverted, revealing a man who was no longer in control of his scripts.
According to the dramaturgical framework, Smith's sense of self was entirely dependent on how his audience viewed him. When the audience began to see him as cuckolded after the entanglement revelation, the face he had spent decades building was shattered. This created an unbearable tension between his desired identity and his current social image. The slap was not just a defensive act, it was a desperate, failed performance intended to reclaim the hero role from a perceived cowardly position. The irony is that by trying to protect his front stage through violence, he permanently stained the backstage reality, proving Goffman's theory that the mask can eventually become a stigma. The architecture of the A-list was now a prison of his own making, leading to a dark paradox of power and isolation.
The deepest layer of the Smith anomaly is the shocking irony of his parenting philosophy, which attempted to replace the military rigidity of his own youth with a new village of radical freedom that nonetheless mirrored the very hegemony he sought to escape. While Smith frequently criticized the chain gang labor of his father's refrigeration shop, he founded and funded the New Village Leadership Academy, a private institution where teaching methods were heavily influenced by the philosophies of L. Ron Hubbard. This created a mirage of secular alternative education that many critics linked to Scientology, casting a shadow over the family's public image. The paradox lies in the fact that Smith, while claiming to provide a normal experience for his children, was actually positioning Jaden and Willow as prophets within a global power structure that prioritized brand value over traditional maturation.
The dark side of this oligarchy was the remotely monitored dynamic Smith maintained with his son Jaden. After the failure of the film After Earth, critics noted that the relationship between the two uncomfortably mirrored Smith's own attempt to position Jaden as a viable Hollywood leading man, achieving the opposite of the intended success. The children were trading on their parents' fame, yet they were also the subjects of an intense military-style scrutiny that prevented them from being allowed to fail and deal with the consequences. This connection to global power structures, where the family acts as a corporate entity, resulted in bizarre public displays, such as the 2014 interview where Jaden and Willow discussed prana energy and their ability to control time. This systemic approach to family life is a form of neo-colonialism within the celebrity sphere, where the children's identities are subsumed by the hegemonic architecture of the parents' brand. Even as Willow Smith explored polyamory and thruples on Red Table Talk, she was doing so within a mediated environment controlled by the family's own production company. The saddest irony is that the freedom Smith gave his children was often a performative practice meant to enhance the celebrity persona pandemic, rather than provide a genuine backstage sanctuary. Consequently, the Smith household became a site of identification for the public, but one that was increasingly untethered from reality.
The bottled rage of the patriarch was the inevitable result of trying to maintain this complex global mirage. The reality of the Smith marriage was a front-stage masterpiece that obscured a backstage of total structural collapse. For 7 years, the world believed in the ride-or-die unity of Will and Jada, while in reality, they had been living entirely separate lives since 2016. This revelation, brought to light during the promotion of Jada's memoir Worthy, exposed the mirage of their life partnership. The root cause of this silence was a strategic commitment to save face and chill for the cameras to maintain their standing as a Hollywood power couple. They were exhausted with trying to live up to the fantasy of the idealized husband and wife, yet they refused to divorce on paper because of a promise made to never break the union. This systemic deception was facilitated by the Red Table Talk platform, which functioned more as a testament to public relations savvy than a paean to radical honesty. The infamous entanglement episode was a feat of brand management designed to neutralize the revelation by singer August Alsina that he had a romantic involvement with Jada. By using therapy speak and obfuscations, the couple managed to confess to very little while creating the feeling of a confessional. Will Smith's sad appearance during the episode, which fueled 1,000 sad Will memes, was later dismissed as mere dehydration, a classic move to reclaim face after appearing cuckolded in the eyes of the global audience. The paradox lies in the fact that this secrecy created a bottled rage in Will Smith. By pretending to be the perfect husband while navigating a nonsensical living situation, he was living in a state of continuous performance without the backstage relief Goffman described as essential for psychological health. The pressure of this mirage was the true catalyst for the Oscar eruption. He was not just defending Jada from a joke, he was defending the architecture of silence he had built his entire life upon. Consequently, when the mask finally slipped, the fallout was precipitous. The aftermath of the Oscar slap provided an unprecedented look at the precipitous decline of a global brand in real-time data. According to Q scores, which measure the consumer appeal of celebrities in the US, Smith's ratings saw a very significant drop that mirrored a freefall. Before the incident, Smith was consistently in the top 10 most positively rated actors. However, between January and July 2022, his positive Q score tanked from 39 to 24. Simultaneously, his negative ratings surged from less than 10 to 26, a 160% increase that far exceeded the industry average of 16. This was not just a temporary dip, it was a flashbulb memory that dominated the cultural conversation, accounting for 5.34% of all Oscars-related post-volume over the last 16 years. The schadenfreude towards Smith's downfall was stitched into neoliberal culture, reflecting an irritation at inequalities that found a release in the fall of an overly public individual. Infegi sentiment data recorded over 6.4 million mentions of the slap, noting that emotions of surprise and anger remained elevated for over a year after the event. The hidden injuries of media power were revealed as Smith's brand health was overshadowed by the controversy, with slap-related discussions even outnumbering those of the 2023 Best Picture nominees. The demographic data shows that the decline was most marked among women and non-Black respondents, although his support among Black Americans remained notably higher at 73% in later polls. This anomaly in recovery suggests that while the hegemonic architecture of his global brand was damaged, the site of identification for his core audience remained resilient. However, the systemic damage to his personal brand was undeniable. The Academy's 10-year ban, approved by 47% of Americans, served as the stigma that solidified his transition from global hero to a flawed human being like the rest of us. The one-brick philosophy was now his only path back from the digital panopticon of public judgment. In 2024, the release of Bad Boys Ride or Die served as the turning point in the road to redemption, proving that the economics of forgiveness are often driven by bankability and legacy rather than moral absolution. Sony Pictures, in a move that demonstrated faith in the franchise, paid a tarnished Will Smith his full quote to headline the film, bringing it in at a bargain $100 million budget. The result was a $56 million domestic opening weekend, the sixth best in Smith's career, and a $405 million global total. This huge win was a testament to the continued drawing power of a movie star who had been socialized to believe that success is the only acceptable response to failure. The film's marketing was strategic, utilizing the world premiere in Dubai to tap into Smith's international hegemony, while the US audience was still navigating their schadenfreude. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an A-, and it maintained a 97% Rotten Tomatoes audience score, ensuring solid play in the weeks to come. The paradox is that while critics found the plot nonsensical and maximalist, the demographic aggregates, particularly Black audiences, drank it up, viewing it as an old-school movie star-oriented tentpole that the market was thirsty for.
This resurrection was not an accident, but a relentless application of the one brick philosophy. Smith showed up, did the press, and learned the local language of the box office once again. By March 2023, his favorability had already climbed back to 56% from a low of 39%. The architecture of the A-list had been reinforced, not by apologizing for the slap, but by laying another brick in the form of a successful summer blockbuster. Consequently, Smith proved that in the cultural economy of fame, the entertainer can survive a precipitous decline if they are part of a legacy franchise that the public is not ready to let die. The hero persona was gone, replaced by a resilient veteran who understood that the smile is a product he must continue to cultivate.
The deepest root cause of the 2022 eruption lies in the bottled rage of a man who spent 30 years pretending to be perfect in Hollywood, while his private life was a nonsensical facade. Will Smith's cowardice as a child, witnessing his father's violence, created a hypnotic need to protect his nuclear family at any cost, a trauma that was triggered when Chris Rock made a joke at the expense of Jada's alopecia. This was not a defense of a wife. It was an unsuccessful performance of the hero role he had been military-style trained to play since the days of The Wall. The architecture of his mind had become a combat zone, where the hidden injuries of his childhood met the dramaturgical pressures of A-list stardom. The paradox lies in the fact that Smith had always thought of himself as a coward, yet the world saw him as the most dynamic and globally recognized force in entertainment. This disturbance in self-perception led to a loss of privacy and an inability to form close relationships, which resulted in the emotional blindness he later admitted to having toward Jada. The slap was the moment the mask finally cracked under the relentless drive for high achievement that ignored his own authentic backstage needs. It was a nihilistic act that proved pretending for 30 years is a systemic impossibility. Consequently, Smith's journey is a haunting synthesis of money, power, and history. He used the military-style discipline of his father to build a hegemonic empire, only to have that same discipline fail him when the backstage reality became too heavy to carry. The resilience he showed in his 2024 comeback suggests that he is still laying bricks, but the one damn brick he is laying now is a humanic version of himself, one that is clever and compassionate, but forever tarnished by the bottle rage that the world can never forget.
The architecture of Will Smith's life is a testament to the fact that you can build a wall high enough to reach the stars, but you can never build one thick enough to hide from your own history. He engineered a global hegemony that fundraised off the very trauma that threatened to destroy him, turning the root cause of his fear into the catalyst for his fame. However, the synthesis of his 30-year career reveals a profound irony. The more perfectly he laid each brick, the more nonsensical his private reality became, leading to a rupture that no amount of box office data could anticipate. He moved from the coward of Winfield to the king of Hollywood, only to realize that the front stage is a mirage that evaporates in the heat of a single, authentic moment of rage.
As he navigates this post-slap era, one is left to wonder if he is finally building something real behind the scenes, or if he is simply mixing mortar for a new, more sophisticated mask. The haunting question that lingers in the digital panopticon is not whether he can remain a movie star, but whether he can ever truly stop being the 9-year-old boy trying to please a father who is no longer there to watch. If the smile is something you cultivate through giving, what is left when you have nothing more to give but the shattered bricks of your own perfection? Is the wall finally finished, or are we all just waiting for the next structural failure in a house built on silence?